everyone, and welcome back to the Reimagine Together live dialogues. I have a very good friend and special guest here today doing a conversation series on love through conflict as part of Reimagine Together. Samantha Thomas. Samantha also joined our Reimagine Together conversations last year, and we talked about love in business. Well, actually, before we jump right in, Sam, do you want to do a quick intro?
Sure.
Where you are, what you're passionate about, and what you're working on now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Carly. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I love how we had our first conversation live this time last year and how there's just kind of this cycle that happens, which is really fun. I'm Samantha Thomas, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am founder of a movement called Just Choose Love, which is a movement dedicated to bringing awareness to love as an ethic in our societal systems and how that can really move the needle forward on some of the most pressing issues we face today. I'm also founder of a business and leadership conference called the Love Summit, and I am marketing director of a lighting company called Valet Energy. I'm also a writer and a researcher on love.
Awesome, great. And if anybody has, in the descriptions on this video and in the replays on both Facebook and YouTube, you'll be able to find Sam's contact information and her past video, which was Love in Business. And if you are happening to join us live at any point, feel free to put in comments and we'll kind of bring them into the conversation as it comes up. All right, so are we ready? We're just going to dive right in. This whole series is how to create, very important in today's landscape, personally, collectively, how to create loving space for conflict. And both Sam and I had a long conversation about why this was really getting to the core of, we always talk about all the greatness of love, which is exciting and wonderful, to talk about all the good sides, but there's a reality to the hard part, and it's the hard part that we all struggle with. So we thought, let's do a series just kind of talking about and opening a space to talk about the hard part, and that's conflict. Sam, how, we use this word all the time though, how do you describe, or let's just kind of set the foundation, what is conflict?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think conflict we tend to have a negative connotation with it, right? I know for me and a lot of people I know, when we hear the word conflict or we are approached with what we think conflict is, we run in the other direction and we don't want to face it. We're scared. We envision this reality of people screaming or getting yelled at or violence or disagreements that cannot be resolved in a way that is loving and in a way that is satisfactory to all parties involved. And I think conflict is defined as a disagreement, right? And just seeing things from a different perspective to the people that we are up against in that conversation or that scenario. And I don't mean up against in the sense of how we tend to think about conflict, because we're really not up against them. It's just a situation that we find ourselves in where there's more than one person involved and they have different viewpoints on a situation. So how can we come into conflict in a way that is healthy, where we can hold those different viewpoints and be open to other people's viewpoints and expanding our awareness and looking at different ways of being and doing things through that conflict, and really use it as a space for growth. That's how I would define conflict and healthy conflict.
Absolutely. Just to repeat back some of the things too that I think we can emphasize a little bit. So 2 different viewpoints. Essentially what's conflict is one thing happened and we've got 2 people or many people that see it and have experienced differently.
Right.
And we can kind of get into this obsession of objective truth, which that's a whole philosophical debate. But there is, so why are we so scared of people who why do you think we have this negative connotation constantly with conflict when we really look at it as simply an event occurs, something happens, and we have two different experiences or views on what that is? Why do you think that turns into such an emotionally charged, challenging, more negative association in our minds?
I mean, it's a really big question, but the first place that my mind goes to is from the time that we're little. I think the first thing that we learn about conflict when we zoom out and learn about it from a global scale, we equate conflict with war and violence. So when we look at society as a whole and what does conflict mean for society as a whole, it means war. That's been our default go-to for when addressing conflict. And that's really not the answer, right? Where has it gotten us? It's just this, we're in this cycle of going to war over and over and over again. And it really never solves the issues that we're looking to solve. It doesn't solve the root problem. So what was the original question?
It was where the negative connotation, like why can we so
I think that's one of them.
Yes. Yeah, definitely, from like a wider scale. And where else, like what other fear, what do you think for you personally has been your journey with where you kind of developed a fear of conflict?
Yeah, well, the other piece of that is to, going back to, if we look at developmental psychology, and this is really what I was just talking about related to war and how we learn about conflict and associate conflict with war and equate conflict to war. That starts when we're young, right? That's our kind of first lesson on a global scale of what conflict means. And then we're also, as children, not really taught in school or, by our teachers or families, unless we have, some people are, but it's rare, I think, to be taught about how to go about conflict in a way that is healthy and a way that is, I think ice maker is making noise, to go about conflict in a healthy way. And I know for myself, going back to developmental psychology and how I was brought up, I don't ever remember really sitting down. My mom, I was raised by a single mom, and I don't ever remember having her sit down with me and saying, Sam, conflict arises. This is what it means. It's not necessarily a bad thing. This is how you approach it. She did teach me about how she was my primary kind of teacher of love, if you will. But I just don't think it was on her radar to specifically talk about conflict in the context of love. She did teach me about how to approach people from a place of love, even when faced with challenging situations. But we didn't specifically use the word conflict. And I think it would really do us all well to have it front and center and not shy away from that word. Because by shying away from it and putting it kind of in this box to the side that is something that should be avoided makes us have more of a negative connotation with it. And then I know that in my own family, there was definitely conflict and dysfunctional family dynamics and not treating each other well at times. And we could have definitely done better, as I think most people can. But I think for me, I learned that conflict was something that equated to yelling and screaming and not being able to get along and being emotional. And on the rare occasion when my family and I were in a really balanced emotional state, we could approach conflict from a more level-headed place, but it was rare. And I think more so because we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about how to do that. And I know some families do a really good job about that. They sit down with their kids and parents and whoever else, and we say, okay, we're having a disagreement. What does this mean? Why do we feel this way? Why are we disagreeing? Where can we find common ground? Instead of letting it just kind of blow out of proportion and lead the way on its own and get out of control. The conflict.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that was, just got Sud here, just put in a comment as well, which it's relevant to this, and what we're going to be talking about here is exactly that. So I said conflict can also be positive sometimes, isn't it? And that's absolutely what we're going to be moving into, is shifting our entire perspective on it. It actually is a positive. It gives us so many opportunities, but we have these fears around it. Like, I know for me personally, it's always the fear of control. So like, if being controlled in some way. And so, and yeah, it always has been more of a fear of aggression, a fear of a blow up, emotional, and so I guess there's so to a certain degree, and maybe I don't know, I guess we all have our personal experiences, but a feeling of like, my experience won't be validated, so I'm just going to avoid it. Yeah. So your experience mostly, Sam, would you kind of fall in the category of avoiding conflict and ignoring it and kind of just letting things go and assuming it's going to be?
Well, it's a little bit about, so yeah, I can relate to equating conflict or relating conflict to aggression and people blowing up at me. And so when that happens, we get really tense and scared and want to run away from it usually, unless we tend more towards anger and aggression ourselves. Maybe we'll go back and react in that same way. But for me, because I don't think anyone likes that feeling of being blown up at, but for me, it's like extremely jarring. I'm a really sensitive person. And so because I related conflict to that growing up, I just wanted to avoid it at all costs. But simultaneously, I will say that I always tried to be able to be confrontational in a healthy way. So if I was having challenges with my peers, for instance, as a teenager, I would try to confront the situation in a healthy way. If I noticed someone was upset and maybe they weren't making it known, but I could just tell by their kind of persona, I would say, what's going on? Why are you feeling that way? But have to be really careful with confrontation too. Confrontation can be had in the wrong way or executed in the wrong way, a way that can also push people away and scare them. So trying to find the balance between both. But I've definitely been subjected to a lot of conflict throughout my life, including, as I just mentioned, I think, in my head, I was thinking of being a teenager when I was talking about my peers and stuff. Had a lot of issues in my younger ages with peers and conflict, and learned a lot from that. And then also in my adult life too. But yeah, I think that these aggression in conflict and confrontation and reaction, these are three things that we really need to take into deep consideration during conflict, and be highly aware of how we are interacting with people during conflict, as to not be aggressive in such a way that pushes people away or scares them, because that's going to defeat the purpose of having a conflict that is actually helpful for the people involved. Because when conflict is approached from a healthy way, the idea is that conflict should actually help us better ourselves and help us to learn more about ourselves, learn more about others, and enter into new and better ways of being and doing things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's spend actually just a moment on that, since you're already kind of leading in that direction, on just when we do start to shift our perspective on conflict away from this idea that it means we don't understand each other. We're too different. Mm-hmm. No, right? These are all the storytelling things that there's no hope. And sometimes we'll talk about that. Sometimes that is the case. I mean, we can get there, yeah. But there's usually something that you can connect on. But when we do shift our perspective on conflict to, this is an opportunity for me to learn more about myself, learn more about another, and expand and understand that we are, create space for different perspectives. And So a little bit about like kind of your own shift, your own perspective shift on conflict. When did you start to see it as a healthy opportunity if treated that way?
It's actually just been very recently, I have to say. I have to admit. I've been scared of conflict for so long, up until recently. And that's partially because I recently started working for this company called Valet Energy that I mentioned in my introduction as marketing director. And something that the CEO is really committed to having us do is team exercises that help us become closer as a team, understand each other better, and find more meaning and purpose in our work. And a big part of that, actually, I have one of the books right here that James, his name is James, he's the CEO, draws on when working to create exercises for the team. It's called, maybe some of your listeners have heard of it. It's called Overcoming the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I don't know if that's
yeah,
right.
It's a class.
Yeah, but in here there is a lot about how conflict can be used to bring teams closer and people closer, and how that starts with creating trust within a team or between people. And so that has really opened my eyes to the importance of conflict. And I've always known deep down that conflict is really an opportunity for growth, but because of my connotations with it and because of the way I grew up and how I thought of conflict and how I experienced conflict, which wasn't most of the time not healthy conflict, I've been so afraid of it. And I just thought it's better to just avoid it. But it's not true, because when we avoid it, then that stuff just gets swept under the rug. It never gets addressed, and our growth is stifled, and we're not able to really elevate to the next level as an individual and as a group or as a team or as a couple, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think, you mentioned something too, that conflict, when we do shift our perspective on it, and I've experienced this many times in my life, right? It's kind of like making a big decision when you kind of are about to, leave a job or move states or move countries or leave a relationship or go into one. And we kind of get all of this anxiety about making this decision. And it's like it's this huge thing, and it builds 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 and it builds. And then you do it, and it's like life moves on, you're fine.
Yeah.
You have it's not to say it's always super easy. There is, but it's incredible the stories that we can build when we don't diffuse something. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I learned, like I can feel that in relation. These days, I can barely go a few hours in conflict without addressing it and opening up a space for it, because I feel so uncomfortable. Yeah. And I feel that storytelling starting to build, and I want to hold on to it. And so I'm just like, tell me now, what do I need to fix? Am I doing something that's hard? And we'll talk about, some of that. But what's so interesting is that trust that you mentioned. I find that that's the release that we get to, this reward. And now it's almost gotten to a place where like, I really only trust once I see I can get through conflict with somebody. And it's like, if there's never anything that comes up in any sort of way, shape, or form, probably not honest. Because we tend to have different opinions or things that come up a little bit. It doesn't need to be super, it's not about being a huge deal. But in all of my relationships, it's always been a little bit of something. And every time that we open that space, and we'll talk about opening, it's like, I feel so much closer. And the other person, it's like, oh my God, I feel so free, because whether or not I was aware of it or whether or not they were aware of it, they were holding on to it.
Yeah, it's a very timely sentiment that you just brought up, because I've been grappling with that myself recently in a variety of situations. And something what I've been grappling with actually is, when is the right time When because timing is a big thing. Even if we know in our hearts that something is meant to be, that it needs to be brought up because we're creating these stories in our minds, we can't tell what the other people or person are or is thinking. So it would do us all better probably to just, put things out in the open, talk about them, get clear. But sometimes you just have this feeling like it's not time yet. Maybe it's not time. Maybe we're not ready. Maybe the other person's not ready. So how to know when it's the right time? And for me, that comes down to not being selfish in situations. And I think this is really big in conflict too. Part of the reason why I think conflict ends up being destructive and aggressive and not helpful is because we get too focused on what we believe is in our best interest and what we want, and we don't think about the other people involved and how we are affecting other people and how we can impact how they feel, how we can impact their lives. And so I think that's really important to take into consideration. Of course, there's a time when we do have to just make a decision, like if something is taking over our mental space and our emotional and physical well-being so much to the point where we're having trouble functioning because we're holding these feelings inside, then that's a time to be like, yeah, I do care about myself and I do need to be selfish in certain ways. I do need to take care of myself. So I am going to step up and bring this up and approach the situation. And I think that at that point, it's just really important to do so in a way that is as sensitive to all people involved as possible and still taking them into consideration, and also ourselves and our own personal well-being. So
absolutely.
And sometimes you just need to walk away too. And, I know you're going to say something, don't forget your thought. I actually, in preparation for this conversation, I went back to our talk from last year that we did on what is love in business. And there was this clip from it where you were talking actually about when is the right time to walk away from a situation. Mm-hmm. And so give me whatever you were just going to say, and then let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on when is it time to walk away, Carly?
Well, from mostly personal experience and working with on alignment generally. So like I look at alignment of visions. When we look at that, the effective teams and generally how people work, we have to want the same things and value the same things. And so conflict is an opportunity, I find, from an innovation perspective and a learning and a growth perspective. It's fantastic. We want different viewpoints because that's an opportunity for anyone to learn and to grow more about themselves and about the collective and get in new ideas and perspectives. We will get so much further on a project from an innovation perspective when we take into consideration conflict and start to look at there's always a grain of truth in everyone. Always. I always find there's something to learn. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes the other benefit that we have in approaching conflict in this way is we want different things. The vision, the purpose. Now, this is when it comes to personal relationships, friendships, businesses, organizations, that's okay. And as long as we have sovereignty and rights, we can walk away. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really important factor, because if we realize that we really, really at our core, like what is it that we agree on and what is it that we don't, and are we impacting? It's not about who's right. It's just simply we have different visions and different belief systems. And so that's a huge benefit of, if you think in a personal relationship, right? It's like, if we didn't have that conflict, I could be in a relationship for 10 years. Where we're never really aligned, we're not really happy, we're not really getting through these things, but so the conflict is an opportunity to go, what do you want and how can I support you? And it might be best if we, right, that we're just not aligned. And and that happens in friendships too, right? It's like we have different stories. They're not lining up. We're not doing good for each other right now.
Yeah. I think that we tend to be really afraid of having those conversations more than anything because we're afraid of facing ourselves and the truth and accepting the truth about others.
There we go. It's kind of, yeah, it's not what I want. And so that's part of the conflict too. I think we can often go, like, I always have to remind myself, like, ask for one thing to improve for yourself. Assume you are not right. And look for the one thing that you can grow and improve on. Ask for it. Get it. And the rest, we don't need to take everything at face value. We all have, but yeah, to be really honest with ourselves, it's opening a space for us to be wrong in our story and viewpoint, which is really hard. We hate that because our story, of course, is the right one.
Duh.
Duh. Of course, I understand and you don't. So we have to be open to that. And then, like you said, too, I think there's a really hard reality, especially in personal relationships where, yeah, it's a very real consequence that you could lose people.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be okay with that.
Yeah, and that brings me to the idea of change, the reality of change, how our lives are centered around the inevitability of change, but we are probably more afraid of change than anything else. And so we avoid conflict out of fear of change and what the result of the conflict will entail or require. And yeah, I know for myself, I've feared change and or conflict because I fear change. But I really liked what you said a while ago, actually, you said something about the times and when you think of conflict or like the times in your life that you were faced with conflict, or you were just giving an example and you were talking about that conflict can involve making a decision that goes against doing something in a way that you were doing it before, whether it be having to or deciding that you want to start looking for a new job and you're faced with decisions of many new jobs and which ones you take and what is the right one. And that's a whole conflict in itself, right? And then I'm going to kind of bring this full circle to what I was just talking about related to fear of change and kind of taking that leap towards the changes that we do truly seek but are more scared of than ever. I can relate my experience actually of deciding to take this job at Valet Energy several months ago. It was so scary for me. It was a huge conflict of what I thought to be my interest for me, because prior to joining Valet, I had spent most of my adult life, my 20s, working in the nonprofit world, starting the Love Summit Business and Leadership Conference. Then that grew into the Just Choose Love movement. Then I resigned from that nonprofit. They transferred the Love Summit to me so I could continue it on my own as an entrepreneur. Then I decided to take a hiatus from that because I wanted to do research on love in business and its impact on society as a whole. Because, when people think of love, they tend to think of this soft, mushy concept when really, as you talked about earlier, love is work. It's a lot of work, and we don't like to talk about that part of love because of the Hollywood depiction of love, which is all this sweet, sentimental fairy tale, and that's not really all that love entails at all. That's part of it, but it's not all of it. That's the gift of love when we do the work.
Yeah.
That it becomes, we get those are the outcomes and the benefits that we get by doing the work is the sweetness and the softness and the affection and the warmth and the emotional aspect of love. But love is really an action more than anything. And so anyway, going back, I took a hiatus from the Love Summit, went back to school. This was only from 2019 through 2020. and did a master's degree on in global prosperity. And I went to London, to University College London, and I was doing research there on love as a social ethic. And I loved it. I fell in love with doing this research on love. And by the time I finished my dissertation, which was just in the fall of last year, I had started writing a book on the concept of love as a social ethic, and then relating that to my personal life and experience with love, why I'm so obsessed with love, why I care about it so much, and how our experiences as children, going back to developmental psychology, I'm such a psychology nerd and philosophy nerd. I love all that stuff. And I love connecting all the dots between our individual personal experiences and how that translates into the collective and the global, humanity in our global experience, because the global is really just a reflection of the individual. And so I started writing a book on that, and I had some major personal experiences with love in the midst of all romantic love, in the midst of all of that myself, that taught me some super powerful lessons. And I was loving writing about it. I was loving speaking about it. I was speaking with people like you and on other podcasts and shows about love, and that this is where my heart is. But at the end of last year, I was like, I'm tired of doing the entrepreneurial thing and worrying where my next paycheck's going to come from. Mm-hmm. And I just need for the first time in my life, had this really strong desire to have some rootedness, steadiness, stability, because I lived in so many different places, traveled around the world, and I've loved that. But now, I just turned 32 this week, and thanks. It's like, it's time to get your shit together, Sam. So I start looking for jobs, and I was looking at some corporate jobs. I was like, there's no way I can do that. I have to find something that is will allow me to marry all the things that I love. I like doing a lot of different things. I like business. I like research. I like philosophy. I like psychology. I like writing. I like psychotherapy and stuff like that. So anyway, I find this job at Valet, and there was kind of some semblance or idea that it might translate into there being some kind of ability for me to use my work related to Just Choose Love at Valet, but it wasn't for certain. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. It's marketing director of a lighting company, so it could have been anything. So I was so scared to make the leap, because I thought, I'm taking a gamble. I'm taking a chance that I'm going to take this job. I know I'm going to be working long hours, and I might just have to let my other work with Just Choose Love that I've poured my heart and soul into my whole adult life. I might just have to take the chance of letting it fall to the wayside. But there was something in me that was like, no, this is right, even though I was more scared than ever to make that decision, the leap to join the company. But I did it anyway, and it's turned out to be greater than I could have ever imagined, and has just become more, given me more content for my book and my writing, although I have not been doing speaking and as much writing recently, because I've been just trying to get, to find my new rhythm of this new lifestyle of mine. But now I'm finally getting back into it and getting more aligned and with myself, and kind of, I had to zoom out a few weeks ago and be like, wait, what am I doing? Where am I? I felt like I lost myself a little bit. And wow, that was a really long way to get to the point that making decisions that scare us and entering these conflicts that we have with ourselves.
That's so the process. That was a perfect example of story. Things, because nothing's out of context.
Mm-mm.
So it is, and that's what I remember every time that we go into conflict too. I was so beautiful. As you were going, I was like, oh, this is so interesting.
With this, is she ever going to bring me back?
I knew you were, but it's so fun. It's so interesting to see how, what we have to remember too, that every time that we come into a new situation or a conflict in our lives, we think that it's about an issue. I have to remind myself of this all the time, even a recent one. You're like, it's about this issue. And then it's like, no, but it's actually like maybe a little bit about that issue, but it's actually about your life.
Totally.
And so that whole story and everything that we bring into one simple conversation, you know, and I think that that's part of that kind of creating space and understanding for ourselves and with other people. Like, we're not coming at this for one question or one issue. We're bringing a whole, and that needs to be validated and seen and understood. That experience of, you know, we are human beings. We don't play with variables. I don't care how much data you put on things. Like, it doesn't exist out of context. It just doesn't. You can't. Even the most logical people, they're operating based off of context, history. And so it was a beautiful example of that. Like, that one decision, this is how much weight that one decision had.
Yeah.
You know, it was a big thing. And yeah, so that's we have some great comments coming in here as well. Dear. But yeah, the ego is the root of any conflict. Well, I think we talked about that in our first dialogue. I remember back last year too, the ego being like our need to be right or to hold on to that, like how you were talking about change or resistance to change. That it's our fear of change. The ego doesn't like to change. The ego, it's like a system. It likes to stay and reinforce itself. Yeah.
You reminded me of when we were in preparation for this conversation, I was taking some notes about how we can, actually I want to bring them up here just to remind myself, because when talking about the ego and the things that are sources of an unhealthy conflict, my first bullet point under that was attachment. And what I mean by that is that attachment to identity. And we can use the word identity as synonymous with ego. It's the same thing, really. It's ego is our identity, or what we identify with and how we identify with the world. And when we are so attached to who we are or who we think we are and how we think things should be, that is such an inhibitor of allowing us to enter into conflict in a healthy way, because it keeps us confined to ways of doing things that are not, it doesn't keep us, let me say this in a different way. It keeps us confined to one way of being and doing, and doesn't allow us to open our eyes to new ways of being and doing things, and to be open to that just in general. And yeah, and it also goes back to what I was talking about before, this idea of just thinking about the self and being so absorbed in ourselves and what we want for ourselves or what we think is best for ourselves, that we can't actually extend ourselves for the other or for the greater the greater good of the situation, because we're so obsessed with what we want for ourselves, or what we think we want for ourselves, or what we think is right for ourselves, or like whether it's sticking to what society says we should do, and traditionally, or whatever it may be. And that also brings me back to love, because love is really the ability to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's growth. And we can, when we take love into conflict, we're able to do that. My first bullet point under how to get better at conflict and what does healthy conflict look like is to use love as a central focus and kind of your compass that you use to guide the conversation and the experience overall. And when we use love as our guiding force, as our compass, everything flows from there. We become more open. We become more willing to see the other person's perspective. We put our needs aside, not in a way that is not taking into consideration what our highest self needs and what really makes sense for taking care of ourselves. But we put the petty needs aside, the needs that we're conditioned to think that we need. Am I being very abstract here?
I mean, it is so. I mean, by its nature, this conversation is, which is why like everybody It's like, yes, but actually, if we can, maybe that's a great. It's actually a very big conversation.
What? Lay it on me.
All right. Well, as we talk about, all right, let's try to visualize. Let's try to paint a conflict here.
Okay.
One do I choose these days? Let's make it really simple. Let's have a love relationship conflict.
Okay.
So, and this gets back, I think you received a question also from someone on Instagram on what to do when your emotions get involved, and how to deal with that. And, and I think for both of us too, like we're just kind of exploring this in dialogue. So let's just kind of see what we find. But if we're coming into a conflict on, I don't know, I did something that pissed you off. You took it to be a selfish action, or you think, I'm trying to do this. We need like a specific story because it's so hard to do.
I don't really. My mind just went to politics.
Yeah.
But we could use an example, a political example, but maybe not a specific one, but just like politics, or we could use a love relationship. I don't know. What do you prefer?
They're all kind of relevant right now.
Let's say that we're in a scenario where we're in a relationship, Carly, you and I, a love relationship.
Okay.
You come to me and you don't like how things are going. We just don't feel aligned. We have different visions for where we want to go next in our lives as partners. And we're kind of at like a crossroads. And I'm really pissed. I'm upset. I want you on my boat. I want you on here. But you are kind of like swimming ashore. You don't want to be on my boat.
I don't want to be on your boat, and now I feel like you don't care about me at all.
Yeah.
If you really cared about me, you would swim to shore with me.
But I do care about you. If that's what you want, I want you to get it. It's just I don't want that too. Are you mad at me for not wanting that?
Yeah, well, we could continue, but I want to set up some parameters here. So if we're having this conversation, it's a great example though. So let's say, you want to go on a boat and I want to go to shore. Next step in life. And all of our storytelling that's around that for each of us, around why this is such a big deal, and you don't love me, I don't love you, no, it's you. My boat is better than your shore. Now, if I'm coming into this, in a healthy way, let's talk about my instincts might be more of like, because we've had this conversation multiple times, or it hasn't really been the conversation, but you've kind of brought it up, we haven't really addressed it, and now I feel like you're being passive aggressive, and you kind of have been, using some tones, and I'm hearing tones every time that you talk. I hear a tone, and I keep asking what's wrong, and you're not really saying anything, and so there's a lot of built up frustration, right, for both of us as we're coming in. I mean, I've had conflicts in the past where I'm literally like shaking, trying to get a word out to someone, and I'm so mad. It's like overflowing on my body. So now how can we start this in a healthy way when it comes to, first setting the temperature, and now how we start to negotiate this in a healthy way?
Can you take a deep breath for me?
Let myself stop shaking.
Yeah. Let it out, girl. All right. Now, so, you're in the middle of it. You're shaking. You're upset. You are so in your emotions and your feelings. Take a deep breath. It's like the lessons that we learn when we're children from our parents. Like, why don't you just sit down, take a deep breath, count to 10. Chill out for a second, okay, babe? And then, but the amazing thing about becoming an adult and maturing and emotional maturity is that we have the ability, also amazing thing about humans, the ability to witness ourselves, observe ourselves, and how we're behaving. So in that, we have the ability to zoom out and say, okay, if I'm you, I'm talking to myself, Carly, Sam, why are you so upset? Why are you frustrated right now? What is this triggering in you? What is this bringing out in you? Can you zoom out from the smaller situation and see how you might be being selfish, how we might be keeping our best interest at heart, but not the best interest of the other person or the greater picture? That takes a lot of courage and love to do that, to take our emotions, settle them down. Emotions aren't bad. They're wonderful. They're a compass too, but they can get out of balance real easily if we don't know how to manage them properly.
Absolutely.
So taking the emotions, balancing them with some objectivity and our ability to zoom out and be more grounded and to see the situation for really what it is and not let our emotions and our feelings color the situation into something that it's really not, and that's not serving us or other people. And once we do that, once we find that, kind of take that deep breath, step back, zoom out, find that balance, that groundedness, then we can start looking at the situation and really seeing it for what it is. Then to take that to the next level, this is the next, maybe even harder part, is to be open to accepting, not just seeing what it is for what it is, but accepting it. And then taking the action that the acceptance of that situation requires. And that's probably the hardest part of all. And that goes back to love being in action, that if we aren't willing to step back, see a situation for what it really is, if we're not willing to accept it, and then most of all, we're not willing to take the action that situation requires, then we're really not being truly loving. And I'll say also the action that situation requires in the name of love, like,
yes,
not an action it has to be an action that is in service of the greater whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we just kind of walk through and highlight a few things too, because I want to bring up the needs thing that you'd mentioned before in this scenario. Mm-hmm. When we do that, yes, the emotions aside, getting to the root of what I heard you say too, ask for the other viewpoint. You've had in your notes, and we've talked about many times, it really is listening and accepting whatever is said. Mm-hmm. Somebody can say, and whether or not it's true, and we almost have to give space for maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Mm-hmm. I always try, and it can be really hard sometimes because I can be pretty sure that I'm being projected on.
What?
I can be pretty sure that it's not mine that's coming. I'm like, yeah. But and I never know. There might be something within it. So when we listen and we open up and let somebody say things, because I think we all get really nervous and scared about saying something that's going to hurt somebody else's feelings. Mm-hmm. But it's relevant. We want to say things with respectful words, but it's important that we voice those, voice how we feel and ask for the other person and listen to it. And hopefully that's reciprocated. I like to start with can you please tell me what I'm doing that's upsetting you right now? Mm-hmm. And what can I do better about it? Now, can I maybe share with you what's accepting? And by opening that space, usually on this side, it tends to be more reciprocated because we're more defensive when the other person is refusing to take any accountability. Mm-hmm. But so, and then, as you were saying before, it's like a negotiation of needs. You know, the petty needs that you were talking about before would be like the ego getting involved and just wanting to be right. I feel like that's mostly like our petty needs are just like, I don't want to take accountability for anything. I don't want any mirror. I was 100% in the right. And when we go, but the deep needs are important. My boat or my shore and your boat, those are deep needs, or we need to figure out if they are. Right? Like that's an important thing. And that's the real issue. And that might mean that maybe and that's the sad thing that we're both emotional about. Maybe you really want to get on a boat and I really want to go to shore, and if there's not a relationship, and that's hard. That's sad. So I think, that kind of walking through that scenario, and exactly as you said, the emotional, really letting the emotion, being able to speak to them, to validate that experience. But then both people voicing their perspective. We've had a lot of that, and I think if we could just do that as a society, in individual relationships and as a society, just create space.
Yes.
To hear everyone's perspective without having a huge reaction. Oh my God. That would be talking about like romantic relationships, friendships, business, politics, global vision. Because so often, I mean, people just get pissed because they're not heard.
Yeah. That was actually my second point under how to get better at conflict and what does healthy conflict look like. The first point was use love as the compass and your guiding force throughout the whole experience. And 2 is listening. And that's what you just talked about earlier, listening and taking accountability and being vulnerable. I think all those things kind of go hand in hand, but listening, and when we get going back to that point of how do I regulate my emotions in a situation, I can feel myself bubbling up and getting really upset and like emotional, not in a healthy emotional way necessarily, but a way that's getting the best of me and this scenario. Just detaching from those emotions for a second and becoming more objective and just listening, focusing on what the other person's saying without judgment, without judging and taking our preconceived notions about the way things should be or the way we want things to be because of whatever reason. And for a second, having the ability to just be like, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe what I want is not right. Maybe my preconceived notion about the way things should be is not right. Have I ever considered that? So I think that that's super important. And one way we can start to do that is just by being super present in conversations and listening to what the other people have to say without harsh judgment. And that can be uncomfortable. My third point was get comfortable being uncomfortable. Get comfortable.
I saw it in your notes. I love that. And it's so true. But that goes into the change and the growth that we're talking about. Growth is uncomfortable.
Yes.
You cannot grow until you go into the unknown. Until we expand beyond whatever, our comfort zone, that ego, that identity that wants to have all the details, know who it is, know its strengths and its weaknesses and everything. There's no growth. You literally can't grow. And anytime, and it's exactly that. So that if we can just embrace discomfort as a way of being and almost get a little bit excited. That's a big step, but I like
I love that.
That's a wonderful point and so important, because sometimes we also think that love is comfortable, right? That's like also part of our, like, what kind of stories have we been telling? Like it can, I mean, it's abusive. We could talk about like destruct, but it's not comfortable to grow.
Yeah. And what you said about, you alluded to vulnerability and the importance of that. I think it's the listening coupled with the admitting that we may not have all the answers, we do not have all the answers and may not be right. And outwardly admitting that to people in situations and being vulnerable in that way, that's what, and really explaining how you feel and sharing how you feel in a way that's, it can be calm and gentle. Like conflict does not need to involve raging emotions at all. It can be calm. Like, sure, cry if you need to cry, get a little angry from time to time if you need to get a little angry, but how much does that anger and aggression actually serve you in the situation? You're putting your body in fight or flight mode, basically, and just stressing out your freaking system, stressing other people out by being that way. Just chill out and regulate your emotions and see how much better you feel and how much better other people feel. And like, we don't want to have that impact on people, you know? And most of us, so wait, there's something I want to say there that's important about most of us and how we want to feel and how we want to impact others and be perceived and how we want to be and who we want to be. I know we're getting close to time, but this is a really, I think, important
down this road too. Yes.
And maybe a good one to end on. But going back to vulnerability and taking accountability, ownership, that's what builds trust with people. That's what shows them that we are genuine and sincere by admitting our faults, by admitting we do not know everything, by being open to new perspectives and ways of doing things. And when you come at somebody like you're going to bite their head off, come at them with a sledgehammer, they're going to run away or they're going to shut down. They're not going to want to share anything with you because they're scared. You're going to bark at them. You're going to hit them. I don't know. Like, we just have to, anyway. So anyways, that's how trust is built. And trust is so important when we're in order to enter into healthy conflict. Trust is one of the primary pillars to having healthy conflict. So I think that that's really important. And I just want to highlight that. And then the last thing, along with the emotional maturity and regulation that we've been talking about, which is really important, finding common ground with people when we enter into conflict. Like, even if, you know, we're entering into conflict typically from a place of believing that we don't share the same point of view as that other person. But if we come into the conflict actually realizing that there are many places we probably do share common ground and there are scenarios in which we can agree, that's really helpful to keep in mind. It allows us to build bridges between the place that that person is and the place that we are in this specific situation and find commonality, which then allows us to move forward together more easily, I believe. And then commitment to we already talked about this, what's in the best interest of the whole rather than what's just in the interest of the self. And lastly, this is, I think, maybe one of the most important points, is that to remember who we want to be. Who do you want to be? Most of us want to be good people. You know, they're the people out there that engage in conflict in a super unhealthy way. We can think of terrorists, or, you know, that's an extreme example. That is a minute amount of people. Most of us want, and I even think those people want to be good. We all want to be good. And so if we can come into situations of conflict from a place of remembering our highest self, Sam, what is the best version of Sam? And how can I bring her into the most challenging situations and remember her at all times and live from that place moment to moment? That is, I think, the key that unlocks the door to having healthy conflict and allows us to approach conflict in a way that contributes to everyone's growth.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't know. There's a phrase, what's best for the whole instead of the I think that another way of saying too, that, I don't know, different phrases resonate with people also. I'm here to love you. A reminder of the fact that we are here, and that is your love-based principle of everything. Before having any engagement with anyone, and these days it's pretty easy, but I'll still get caught, and I have to check my own ego and check my own self and bring awareness to my intention of the conversation and go, is this about you being angry or being mad or proving, or are you here to love somebody else? You want what's best for them, and you want what's best for you, and you don't get to control anyone. That's not love. You don't get to force and control. So what is the best way, as you're talking about that higher self and bringing that awareness to how can I love this person more and show love for myself at the same time? And having that kind of guide, that love-based guide is, again, on its own, would just be beautiful. Yeah. And we're going through up too. I think it's a good reminder also those emotions that come up, along the way, like especially now and in this world, personal, just had an incident recently, where, it's like if it's okay. Like we have to process those things and know that something bothers us. It's an indicator that we have to look for alignment. And if you do yell or scream or shame someone or find yourself getting real, like pokey with what you're saying, you can just say, I'm sorry. And that's part of that accountability too, right? Like every now and then it pops out of me and I'm like, that's not my higher self. That's not who I want to be. That wasn't about love.
I will say, I agree. We're all only human and we definitely slip up sometimes. And I will say though that I had a lot of that growing up in my family where people they're lashing out bad and blowing up and saying things that were really, really hurtful that I still carry to this day. And that afterwards would be like, oh no, I love you. It's not true. I love you.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
You got to be careful with your words. We have to be careful with our words. Words are very powerful. I know they're just words, but they are so powerful and we remember them and we feel them and it can be hard to forget them. So I would really encourage people. I'm trying to do this myself and it's hard. It is hard, but especially around people that, especially when I'm triggered. And I think it's mostly, anyway, I won't go into detail right now, but it is hard. It's hard to control that. But I think it's really important that we remember and try to do a better job at that because words are so powerful.
Definitely. This is sort of like if we learned acting growing up, it would be very helpful. And, because when those emotions come, sometimes we're like, wow, and some people are more easily triggered or there are a lot of cultures and places too, right? Where like people are like hot tempered, so used to kind of flying off the handle and like, don't take it personally and this, and it's like, I don't even know where exactly to fall on that, but energetically, that's a lot of disruption happening all the time. But when we process it, if we can even just step away and kind of like scream in a corner, when it comes, like let it out somewhere else for the most part, or try to use the words as we have more awareness. Because when it does kind of blow up, it's contagious. Everything is contagious.
This is
everything is contagious. Our behavior.
Yeah, but we do have to accept, our dark side. We all have that. It's good to be emotional and let our emotions out, but how can we channel our emotions or channel them positively and also use them, or like let them out in a place that is not affecting other people in a negative way. And like you said, there are some cultures where people just interact like that, or people just that interact like that and they're okay with it. But we have to take into consideration that everybody's different. If someone's going to come at me and call me a bazillion different names and scream at me in my face, I'm probably not going to, it'll be harder for me to get over than someone else maybe that has thicker skin and isn't as sensitive. I'm getting better at it as I become more enlightened.
Yes.
As my ego dissipates. Well, yeah, it is. I'm not saying emotions are bad and that we shouldn't let our anger out and our emotions out. We need to. I love doing it in the car. It's really nice to just sometimes scream in the car.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's Kevin Mack says, my 2 cents, a tender tone using soft verbiage and a cushioned delivery can turn conflict into more of a courageous and constructive conversation. Tenderness can really help temper emotions. Yes, I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that gets that tenderness or that courageous coming in with vulnerability, that you might be wrong, open to take personal accountability, a part of some accountability for what's happened. And the tenderness. God, if we could all speak more.
I love tenderness.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful word.
Yeah, that was on one of the on Instagram. I made a post after my birthday about like some of my intentions for this year, and one of them is to receive more tenderness. I just think and to give more tenderness, because I notice when I give that to others, the impact, like Kevin is saying, it has on other people. It is like magic. It's similar. It's like kindness, similar, but when kindness is coupled with tenderness, it's like this magic potion that just lets people melt a little bit and just be more fully themselves. And
absolutely. Yeah, it has I don't know what it is about that word. I actually would have to look it up, but it has a naturally, like it has a natural depth to it, authenticity to it, where I think like, kindness or whatever, like kindness, it's nice, but it's kind of like kind. Yeah. And then tenderness just has this real commitment, this authentic commitment to that love and that compassion and that openness.
Very deep word.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to, let's, as we kind of wrap up for today, we'll do a little.
I'll let you.
So we went through what, just kind of bringing more awareness to the word that we use all the time, which is what is conflict. And the fact that it exists is just simply 2 different viewpoints, 2 different experiences of an event that are in disagreement with each other, that are in discord fundamentally in some way. And then why we tend to avoid.
Can I just add to your definition of it? And I think what we've touched on is that conflict, or we've illuminated, is that actually that's more so the traditional definition of conflict, but that conflict is actually an opportunity to enter into a situation of disagreement, but then grow together in that conflict and rise up to a higher level as individuals and collectively.
Beautiful, Sam. So that's what this entire conversation and thing was about. So we're looking at, it is the same thing, but yes, let's just kind of redefine as we talk about the shift in perspective into new paradigm leadership, a shift in our perception of things. So old school definition of conflict is discord, 2 different viewpoints. That's a part of it. If we can redefine it in our minds in every single day in our lives as an opportunity to learn and grow in a loving way with another person. I love it. Look at more in practice, I'm sure. And so as we continue on this conversation series, it'll be fun for, for everyone if there are particular conflicts or, and Sam, jump, if there's anything that you want from anybody who's watching this to just kind of contribute questions, challenges that they would like to be discussed, have other people comment on, workshopped. Ask.
We did have a question. We had other questions come in that maybe we can address next time. And one of them was how to approach, it was a question, but it was just mixing friends and business. That's the title of the question. And then it was a longer question underneath, or many kind of component pieces related to that, how to approach conflict with friends in business, how to navigate business with friends, how to create trust in business with friends. There's this preconceived notion that you shouldn't do business with your friends because or family, because it just always ends up shitty, which is not true. And it doesn't have to be that way. And like the person who sent this question said, she actually sent me a voice text, a really long voice text about it, explaining her whole situation. And she was like, yeah, I know people say that you shouldn't mix friends and business, but that's like, of course I want to. What would be more gratifying than that? To work and like make money with my friends. Or family, whatever, what could be more fulfilling than doing that with people you love? I mean, I couldn't agree more. So anyway, these are things that in the series we can talk about. We have, is it 3 more, or we're just continuing on and on?
We'll just keep going as we have, more topics, more things to dive into, or workshop, whatever. Whatever's most of interest and need at a time. Kind of have our conversation on love through conflict once a month, and any comments that people have for particular things that they want to look at. Yeah, business, friends, and family and business will be a good one. But we'll maybe just give it a whole episode. I will say it has so much to do with this, though. Like this is the reason that people don't. I found I only do like with family and friends at this point in time, but it's so often because it's like, no, this is a good relationship and this can't handle conflict. I can't separate. So I think it would be a great conversation to talk about how to kind of do that, because it does change the dynamic of a friendship, and you need to know that it has the capabilities of dealing with conflict well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, wonderful. Any closing love comments?
I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so grateful for the people that watch and support and are committed to and interested in operating from an ethic of love and just pushing themselves outside of their comfort zone and being open to new ways of being and doing things.
Absolutely.
So thanks to you for creating this space, and for everybody for being a part of it. And we're on the journey together, and that's what makes it so special.
Yes. I'm here to support each other along the way.
Ma'am.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining Reimagine Together. Sam will be back, and we'll be talking about her perspective on love through conflict. And we've got some other really cool series on what new paradigm leadership is and what new paradigm societies can emerge as we start to find this within ourselves. So feel free to join us every Thursday for the most part. I'll be going live on different conversation series. Much love and strength, and I will see everyone